All right, I think we're live. Here I am. I'm in my office. We are going to get started. First, I'd like to welcome everybody out there, and we will establish a few little ground rules here on this video. I am going to be getting to as many questions as I can. Hopefully, I can answer your question. If not, then maybe I've already answered it over at my website, FileMaker Magazine. You can see actually on screen, actually up that way. I provide a service, and it is at FileMakerMagazine.com. But enough of the promotion. Let's get into the questions. Ground rules with regards to asking the questions. I will show the chat, actually, as you're watching this. If you're watching it live, you can see the chat on the side, and I'll leave the stream going as well. There's not going to be any questions coming in, but you can ask questions about what I'm talking about. And then here I'll bring it on screen because it's very likely that, I don't anticipate that I'll get flooded with questions. We're doing FileMaker. It's a very small community of developers, but very passionate community. But I will be able to bring, you will see the chat, and you guys can answer each other's questions in the chat. And I don't need to put it on the video here, but there is a very slight delay. I put on ultra low latency so that hopefully shortly after I've shown something on screen here, and by the time you've watched it, the time hasn't passed too much and you're able to get out a question. So hello to everyone. I'll put that in here for those of us that are live. Hello to everyone. And just to get things started here, what I'm going to do is I am going to start with some questions that I already had that came in. I emailed people to ask a question through the magazine website mailing list. I posted on Facebook and I posted on Twitter. And what I'll do is I'll HBH, I'll get to these and I will answer them. And I'll just get started with a little bit of content that might make you pretty interested in FileMaker. If you're new or if you're advanced, either way, I'm going to be doing a wide range, all the way from low-end questions to high-end. I will do my best to not get mired down and focus on one specific problem that's very particular to a given solution, and focus on stuff that might be broadly helpful to most everybody. And I can see the chat off to the side here out of my peripheral, but not directly, but I will read it. So yes, this is being recorded right now, Candido. This is being captured by YouTube, and I will leave it up there. If there is somebody in the audience that as I get to questions, as you're watching, if you make note of the timestamp, and just keep a little log, that might help me out, because then I can post that all those timestamp starting and stopping points. It creates an index for the video, which is really helpful to future viewers. So let's get into some questions. Let's do some FileMaker stuff here. I have everything just in a text file. And here was the first question that came in. Greg H. had asked, what was the tool that you mentioned in part 1 video of cropping images with JS on the magazine website, where you paste over 30,000 characters? So for those of you that don't know, we'll take a look at this exact problem, and I will show you something that is hidden that you probably didn't know about. It is this. I believe I have FileMaker running. All right, so we are going to create a new FileMaker file. We're going to be creating a lot of new files on the desktop here today. I'll call this one 30,000. And that is because whether we have a field or whether we have a text box, what have you, I'm creating a new script, by the way, there is a function called insert text. And we also have access, let's see, yeah, my Zoom is working, good. We also have access within our manage area of the custom functions, the ability to add a custom function. So there's two things that I have on screen right now. I've got an insert text, and then I also have my calculation dialog box for a custom function. Now, one of the limitations that we have with JavaScript libraries, which is going to be very important coming up here, in FileMaker 19, they've already announced it at DevCon, and it's on YouTube, that JavaScript is going to be easier to pass things back and forth. It actually, most importantly, solves a problem on Windows, where Windows has a limitation in that you can't shove a whole lot of things through a URL. And that's really the only communication that we have between a web viewer and where JavaScript can be run and then back into FileMaker. FileMaker is solving that with a little script in the JavaScript in a web viewer that allows it to communicate back and forth without that limitation. So the reason that I'm telling you that is one of the things that we need in FileMaker are JavaScript libraries, and they are very large. So I'm going to open up a web browser, and I'm going to go to a website called CDN.js. CDN.js, I think it's, there we go. Let's go, yeah, that will load something right there. There, that's fine. All this text that we have on screen, it is most definitely probably more than 30,000 characters. Let's see if that's the case. We're going to go back over to FileMaker. I don't need my custom function there. I'm going to this insert text, and we're going to see if this exceeds 30,000. Oh, there we go, right there. See, dun, 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 30,000 characters. So it turns out this is a limitation, not in terms of what FileMaker can store, but actually a limitation, from what I've heard, of the OS ability to paste this. I don't know if that makes sense, but what it does is that we have all these things that we're going to be shoving into FileMaker. So this is a little preview. I have not released it. It is not out in the wild, but I will show you a tool that I have been working on. Unfortunately, this seems like a little bit of promotion, but I actually wasn't going to show this, but Greg asked how I did it. And I'm going to give you the information of how it works. So I'm giving you the secret, even though I haven't released the tool. So I'm going to open up FileMaker here and open up a hosted database that I have. It is a database called FM Recipes. And as I log into that with the wrong password, there we go. Now, FM Recipes is just a copy and paste database. It allows me to copy and paste things into a FileMaker file really quickly. Most importantly, layout items. But there is a tool that I have been working on called the snippet editor. So if we want to say that this is actually the first introduction to this particular tool, what this does is it allows you to copy something, anything from a layout, and then get the clipboard. Now, FileMaker's clipboard is all in text. When we look at the snippet, you can see all of this. This is XML. In fact, this is important to know about because FileMaker is making it so that we're going to ultimately be able to update a copy of FileMaker, and it uses all of this XML in order to apply so that you have an older version and you've worked on your developer version, and then you'll be able to apply stuff. But it's always been available on the clipboard. So it turns out that you are able to get stuff into this XML format and then just get it right into FileMaker. So since we have that limitation, which I will take all of this content right here, copying this from a web browser, when I go to this little notepad, which just gives me a little clip space area in order to edit text, if I paste that in, I have this little button called Make. And what it's doing is it's going to make either an insert text or it's going to make a custom function. I get to choose between the two right here. I'll choose insert text, and then I will go over to FileMaker, and where formerly I was not able to double click and paste the content in here, now that it's on the clipboard, if I just paste, if that is there, let's see, oh, I need to copy the clipboard, that would help. So I'll set the clipboard, it says that I copied it, and I'll paste. And so there we go. You can see that where formerly I was not able to paste it directly into FileMaker, I am, through the clipboard, able to bypass that 30,000 character limit, and it works for custom functions as well. Now, you are able to do this yourself. You are able to solve this problem. You will need the free Base Elements plugin, and then that supports editing the clipboard. In fact, that's what I'm using for my own tool right here, but you can see that when I double click in here, that the specified text does indeed have well over 30,000 characters. So it's not a limitation of FileMaker, it is a limitation of FileMaker's UI or the OS. Because if I click and try to make an edit here, you'll see that it's got those more than 30,000 characters, but lo and behold, you can get a full library into a single insert text, or in the case of a custom function, I can go over here. Let's go ahead and save that. I will click make a function, call this what I want. This is font awesome. Awesome, and say OK, and I'll set the clipboard. I'll go back over to that FileMaker file, bring up my Manage Custom Functions, and then I just click Command or Control V. Paste that in, and there it is, right there. I've bypassed the 30,000 limit and been able to get that all right within that. So the underneath the hood, since you can copy this, if you're an advanced developer, and I imagine somebody else is going to make a tool now, let me show you what it is. It is nothing but this snippet right here. All of this XML, if you put it in a proper XML format, and you can see everything in between here, in between the C data. So let me scroll down and show you how small it actually is and get rid of it. There you go. Ay, a little fast there on the zoom. That is it right there. If you replicate this, and since it's on video, if you copy any text that exceeds the 30,000 characters, and then you put it in between this area of the C data, and you give it a name right here, then as long as you can get that onto the clipboard, and you can do it with the Base Elements plugin, you can then get that into an insert text step, because that's what this is in particular. And you can do it with a custom function. Well, this one is a custom function. If you want to see, you can see right there, that's the custom function. FML XML snippet. Let's make the insert text part, and let's get rid of that. It's a little bit different on the two different formats here. The custom function uses a C data, whereas a insert text script step, you can see right there, uses in between text. So there is some tricks that I'll tell you. You have to escape things properly, but I've given you the clue, I've given you the key, and I've given you how it actually works. So that was our starter there, and hopefully that is exciting for a lot of people. A lot of people who watch YouTube videos that only get 5 minutes in. I just showed you something that pretty much, I think 0.01% of the FileMaker world actually knew about, but it is there now for the world to know that you can exceed that 30,000 character limit. When is this tool going to be available? I don't know. I'm still working on it. I will give you here a little bit of a preview. Let's say I want these buttons right here. I'll just select them. I copy those. Actually, let's include some fields. I'll just give you a little bit of a clue of what it does. Browse, get the clipboard. It basically just allows you to look through all of your objects. You can see that I can flatten and look at all objects, all 62 here. It allows me to directly edit the CSS. If there is custom CSS or if there is individual CSS off of each individual object, it allows me to actually cycle through all the different things that are available in FileMaker. I can modify the scripts, the parameters, tooltips, placeholders, hide calculation, formatting, triggers, etc. Whatever I might want to modify, and then be able to save this. So for example, if I wanted a replacement here of this field to be of a new context, I would just copy this, come over here, and just put my new table occurrence. New table OC, whatever it's called. And then I'm able to copy and paste that into another location by setting the clipboard. But enough of that. You're here for your questions. So I will see if any questions came in as a result of that, and we'll hop to the next question here. I'm going to scroll up. All right. So any questions, see if they came in. As an intermediate FileMaker developer, what do I recommend for the next step to make myself more valuable, learning SQL or JavaScript? Yeah, SQL is not what I would suggest. JavaScript is going to be immensely valuable within the context of doing things within FileMaker. You don't have to go to an extreme level with learning with JavaScript. Learning the fundamentals will get you enough such that you can get your data out of FileMaker into a web viewer, let the web viewer do what it needs to do, and then get it back into FileMaker. That's the biggest hurdle, is how do I get my data out of FileMaker, manipulate it in JavaScript, and then get it back into FileMaker. And that's, if you're comfortable taking that approach and just learning that part, then everything else will build onto it. And I just did 2 videos on the magazine website that is specifically walking through that particular process. All right, Hi Matt, thanks for doing this. What is the recommended and fastest way for moving records from one table to another via a script? Lookups, import, or others? Number one, lookups themselves aren't, those are really old school in terms of getting data. There's only one use case where you need to use lookups. And if you look at the lookup dialog box in FileMaker, in fact, let's go ahead and bring that up. Go over to FileMaker here, open up our 3000 database, and go into a lookup dialog. And just so that we know. So this lookup dialog that we have on screen right here, really the only reason you need to know lookups is that it has this little option right here, copy next lower value or copy next higher value. This is the only reason you need to learn or ever use lookups. Lookups are a holdover from when before FileMaker had auto enter, and auto enter calculated values pretty much replaced lookups. However, auto enter, you can do this feature, the copy next lower and the next higher. And really the only time that these apply that I've ever used them are on pricing strategies where you say a user is going to, if they buy 5,001 items instead of 5,000, they go to a different price level or they get a price break. And that's what this actually helps you do. It allows you to go either up or down in a convenient way and using that via a lookup. Otherwise, most everything you need is going to be solved by a calculated value. So this actually, in my opinion, should almost be hidden, the lookup value in terms of whether you need to use that or work with it. But when it comes to the question of the fastest way to move records, fastest is always relative to how your system is structured. So for example, in FileMaker, if I have across, and I only have 5 fields on my table right now, if on these 5 fields, if every one of them had an auto enter field, and that auto enter had to evaluate its calculation, that import process could be really slow. So let's take the example of 10,000 records. I have 10,000 records, but I happen to know that out of that 10,000 records, maybe half of them are not something that I ultimately want to have into my database. Well, in that case, we set up what's called a shadow or a mirror table, which mirrors your table, which has your structure and everything about how your FileMaker solution works. And that mirror table does not use any auto enters. It is just a plain, straight import the table. In fact, one of the other time savings you can get with regards to importing and exporting is when you have fields, everything that's in this dialog and in this dialog, FileMaker has to do. So any auto-enter calculated text, any automatic creation of dates, in the storage, any indexing that is turned on for a field, FileMaker has to do that. Now let's think about this. If we're importing into a mirror table that has all the same fields as your normal solution, you're preemptively importing into that table, you can turn indexing off. In fact, you can set it to none and uncheck this box so that nothing gets indexed. By doing that, you're importing really fast. Then selectively, based on what you need to check in the mirror table, you can then go in and set which fields do become indexed so that you can pull data from the mirror table into your FileMaker solution, or into what you consider your actual FileMaker solution. Other options deal with how your data is structured. If it's really weirdly structured, or there are better ways to get data into FileMaker, FileMaker's import dialog isn't the only way. You can read a file in FileMaker through a script. So in our scripts, which we're in right now, I could look at my file steps. I'm just going to type in the word file, and I'm going to say create get data file, get file size, insert file. There we go, open data file. So these newer functions of open data file and get data file, and this one, read data file. If I have a really small file that maybe I'm only dealing with, say, 1,000 records, I might bypass using FileMaker's import step, because I know that the data, when I'm reading it in, that data could be really small. So I don't have to rely on the fact that, oh, FileMaker has an import and export, and that's the only way to get data in. One of the ways that I think about data is that it's very much like water. When you turn on the sink, it will flow wherever you want it to flow. Just put your hand under it and just redirect it, and that water will flow. Think of your data the same way. And if you can get your data in to FileMaker using the import by importing a file into a container and then reading that, or reading the data directly from the file while it's on the operating system, you don't have to use the import and export dialog box. Just always remember to take a look as I open up. I'll go over to the Finder here and we'll look at this particular file right here. We're always interested in size. Always be willing to look at the fact that I've got a file right here and it's 832 bytes. That is tiny. Now, if this was, say, 20 megabytes, then yeah, FileMaker can handle it. If this was a 1 gigabyte file, I'm probably going to go through FileMaker's import-export dialog box. But usually when you're under a few megabytes, you can get it into FileMaker and you don't even have to use the import-export. And again, this all depends on your solution and how it's structured. And some of the things come down to learning about that indexing and the just thinking about how many operations are going on when you're going to do something. All right, so I'll put these off to the side for right now. I'm going to jump to one of my other questions. I will get, there's Greg, he asked the question. I will get to the chat. We'll go to another question. So I'll go between the chat questions and these questions and I'll scroll through them, swapping and swapping between all these different things. It's good to keep a good flow. Yeah, go ahead and save all those. Of content so that it keeps it interesting too and we're not mired down by a particular problem. All right. So here's another question that came in from Tom G. It says, we do network installations along with other computer-related tasks at our locations. I would like to be able to easily pull up photos of our installs when the customer calls and something isn't working. That way my techs can see what the customer is looking at and guide them as to what they might be able to do to resolve the issue. All right, so if I interpret this question, it sounds like he wants a way where a customer of his, or a client, let's call him a client, takes a picture using a phone, and then they want to be able to get that picture into a FileMaker database, I'm guessing associated to those client records in order to see things. So we're presuming at this point that maybe the client doesn't have access to FileMaker or is just going to put those images up somewhere. And my thought process in terms of this one is you can always set up FileMaker to go outside of where FileMaker is and go grab something. So my thought process is if you have images that are being captured, what you need to do is give your client a location where they can put those pictures, and then FileMaker is going to watch that location. So in fact, on YouTube, I did a video about importing from Dropbox. So the solution here would be for each client, you would create a Dropbox folder. You would then share that Dropbox folder to each of the clients, to each respective client. And then what happens is on FileMaker, now you can do this on a client machine or you can do it on server. I would probably build it on server because unless you have a lot of clients. If I had a ton of clients doing this a lot, you might want to distribute the load. But for the most part, it sounds like you'd probably be able to do this on server. Server would install Dropbox as well, the same Dropbox account where all of the shared folders are. Then you can write a server-side script for FileMaker that will run in server. I believe I have server on here. Let me bring that up. In fact, we'll bring up a new window. And I have localhost. I think I can get into it from here. I can. All right. All right, so we have FileMaker Server here loaded. If you've never seen FileMaker Server, this is the new UI. It started in FileMaker 17. It's going to be FileMaker 17, 18, 19, what have you. Let's see, under Administration, Connectors, Web Publishing Configuration. There we go, Script Schedules. So there are two ways to have something happen automatically on server. On server, you can use a schedule that will run a script from within a FileMaker database on whatever time frame you want. Otherwise, the only other option that we have in FileMaker is a user-invoked script that will run on server. So let's cover this first one. We'll create a new script here. In FileMaker, in our scripting workspace, we of course have the perform script. And we'll put that right there. But we also have the perform. Now this one is super powerful. In fact, a lot of you out there in the audience are probably have not exposed yourself to this script step nearly as much as you can. And by the way, I should mention, this is red on my copy of FileMaker, where it will probably not be red on your copy because of this plugin that I have installed. This MBS plugin does what's called syntax checking and checks to make sure that everything is as it should be. But this perform script on server step allows you to tell server to do something. Now on server, you're going to be able to basically watch those Dropbox folders, and those Dropbox folders, as soon as your client takes a picture at their location, puts it into Dropbox, your FileMaker server is going to be running a script that says, I'm constantly looking at this set of folders. If I find a particular folder that has a picture in it, I'm going to import it. Now, how do you associate those folders to particular clients? Let's look at that. Here in my database, I have a primary key of an ID value, and I'm going to create a field called client name. Client name. We created that, and we'll say, okay, we'll put those two fields on the layout of the client name and the ID. We'll drag them on, go into browse mode, and there is our ID right there. So this is a big time client. So what we want to do with regards to the folder is this record belongs to the client, but we don't want to necessarily use this as the name of the folder, big time client, within Dropbox. Within Dropbox, what we actually want to use is this ID. Because what happens is our script that's going to be checking things, as it checks things, when it finds a file out of all these different folders of clients, if that folder, as part of our path, is seen, we're able to pull that out of the path, and then we have an immediate association that this image that we just got from this ID now associates to this client, and then we can do whatever we want. We can notify and do all kinds of things. The script on server side is going to be right here under your script schedules. So the script schedules in FileMaker, you are able to click to create a schedule, and then you can specify the script that you want to run that comes from your database. This could be the script over here. It could be check Dropbox folders. And all it's going to do is each time that the schedule runs on FileMaker Server, this check Dropbox folders can basically look at the contents of a folder. We can even see if file exists right there. So if you're using a FileMaker 18 or higher, I believe all of our file functions work here, you can check whether files exist. Now, getting a listing of the files in a directory, that you might have to use a plugin for, and the most popular plugin and free is going to be the Base Elements plugin. But you can do it with Base Elements or anything else. So as I go to Scriptmaster, if you're using Java, this is usually my default because it's free and doesn't have licensing. It will check the operating system, look at a list of all the files within all the folders, pull the ID out of the path, and bring that in. But Bbox is Mac only. Either one of these is what I would probably default to for that solution. So I hope that was a good answer to your question. Let's go back over to the chat now and see what we've got here that has happened in our chat. All right, so Fernando asks, Matt, I'm having problems installing Base Elements plugin. Aha, this is a very good question, actually, right here. Anybody knows what could possibly be? Works on 17, did not work on, so it so happens to be that at the time of this recording, the Base Elements plugin, and thank you for pointing this out. Let's do a search for Base Elements. Actually, there it comes up. So there's our domain. If you are trying to download or get the Base Elements plugin at zendesk.com, it turns out that under these downloads, unless Nick has uploaded a newer version, on the Macintosh, there is a problem with the base elements plugin. In fact, I'm going to download this now and see if it's still the same right now. You can find this where if you've got GitHub, I don't know if they've got their GitHub on here. Search for GitHub. No. About the base elements plugin. Let's see if that's got their GitHub. I'm looking for their GitHub repo. There we go. GitHub issues page. So we'll bring that up. So anytime we're working with a plugin, if it's available in terms of being public open source, I've gone over to the GitHub page where this is where we can look at the issues that this particular plugin from Goya has. When we look at issues, we will see this one right here, Base Elements plugin not loading anymore since this morning. It turns out that Base Elements plugin, the particular version 8.1. something had an issue. And if we scroll down right here, there is a link right here where Nick was updating it. I don't know if he has updated his plugin, but it's always a good place to check here. Here's where I chimed in and mentioned that I would tweet out the fact that the plugin had a problem. So if you are looking for it, yep, looks like we've got a lot of other people that had some problems. This is the place to go currently, although this will be updated in the future in terms of that plugin. So Fernando, I hope that answers your question and where to go in order to get the updated one and find out what people are saying about a particular plugin. All right, so let's move on to another question. Hopefully that answered it. Let's pick another one from the, we'll go over to the file of where I've got some questions. We'll answer that one and then we'll go back to the chat. All right, Andre asks, he has a doctor's table of over 200 doctors and over 5,000 patients, and a link table between them, a red box. So we're going to open up an image and take a look at that. I was thinking to try to merge doctors and patients table into one single table called contacts. So my first question is if this is clever, and how can I merge this while keeping relations between the patients and doctors? Okay, this latter part of the question, how can I merge this while keeping relations between patients and doctors? Unfortunately, you can't. Whenever you're working in FileMaker, if you're making a major structural adjustment to your solution, it's very difficult to maintain what you've developed and keep it functioning. Now, in FileMaker, I'll give you a little bit of a tip of how you can approach this and how I've done this in the past. But first, let's solve the problem of having a separate doctors and a separate patients table. When we head over to FileMaker, and this is a very, very common thing that I see, we limit ourselves when we're thinking about our businesses and what we're trying to structure in terms of data, and we don't abstract enough from what we're actually storing, from the actual data versus how we think of the data. And I hope I'm able to clearly distinguish between these two. Ultimately, we are dealing with people, no matter what. And in this solution, I'll actually just start a new file. And I will call it, whether you want to call them contacts or not. And I started to cover this in the COVID series that I'm doing, which I will be getting back to. Let's just call this solution for general, because I need to keep a pace here. All right, so in this solution, I am going to name my table of simply just people. I am not going to name it doctors and patients, even though that's how I think about it, but I'm going to name this table people. I am always going to default down to the fact that a collection, and I meant to rename that, so I'm going to delete that, and I meant to rename this to people and change it and say okay. So I'm going to create, actually we're going to put a name of a person in my people table here, double click here and put just a name, and we'll get those on the layout. So I'll take my name, always like to see my ID, and we'll put the name, and we'll see between these two instances. So I've created two records now in my solution. I'm going to put Matt, and then I'm going to put another record. I'm Andra, I think I spelled that correctly, and then I'm going to put, let's put Mary. All right, so what distinguishes Mary from Matt from Andre? This, in the world of data structuring, is simply a designation. It's a classification. In HTML, it's an attribute. The only thing that designates a difference between this record and that record would be a designation or classification. Now, how you structure those classifications can be completely up to you. The most basic way in FileMaker, and not the way that I would suggest, is that you do something like this, where you go in and you do classification. And within that classification field, you then go over to FileMaker, cancel, I want to accept that. You go over to your value lists, and you then are going to create a classification that says people type. And you're classifying these people now, and you have doctor and you have patient. The reason that this is not a good way to classify data, but it is the most common way that people start to classify data in FileMaker, is because you lose a lot of your flexibility in terms of your structuring. Now with this field right here, I'm going to go over to the inspector, and then I'm going to go to that fourth area where we have our ability to control the type, and I could make this a checkbox. And I can set my people type list. Now, why a checkbox over a radio button? In fact, this is good to think about this. In this scenario, a radio button means that Matt could be a doctor, but as soon as I say that Matt is also a patient, which a doctor can very well be a patient, it switches between the two. So this is very much an and situation. It's not this or that. So we go back over to our setting with our field selected, and we say checkbox. So it is Matt can be a patient and Andre can be a doctor and a patient. We want to put this in the structure of our database. And again, there's multiple ways that you can do this. Of course, another alternative here is that I could put a classification, or I could put each field could be a classification. So let's look at that one. I could have a doctor class and a patient class. Now let's talk about these and how this actually works. And in fact, both of these, I would probably set these to numbers because they would be a Boolean value. We'll change those. So in this particular case, this would be a positive value of 1 for Andre because he is a doctor, and then he could also be a patient, so it would be a positive value of 1. What makes this structure pretty nice is it's very easy to search. The data is in this same table, and I am classifying or applying these attributes to this particular person directly in this table. The fields will be super lightweight, but I am making the table wider. And by making the table wider, that means that every time that this record is going to be requested in FileMaker, all of these fields are all transferred by FileMaker. In other words, as opposed to SQL, SQL is very much a pick and choose type of language. When you execute or create a SQL statement in MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server, you're saying, I want this, this, and this from these fields. It goes to the database and it just gives you that. In FileMaker, we're always concerned about the fact that FileMaker is an all or nothing, meaning if you have put the field into your table, that means all that data is going to be transferred. So if you have a table that has 2,000 fields, all 2,000 fields are being transferred. So in FileMaker, we are always thinking about this potential impact. So we want to structure the data so that it's as light as possible. So that's our second option. Our third option would be, let's put it into the database or into the data structure. So that now becomes, let's add a new table where you can classify things. Now this is going to get really crazy. I could create a table called doctors, and I could create a table called patients. Now this is not where I'm going to store my information about doctors or patients. It's simply a table that's used in order to classify and hold a list of IDs. So within the doctors table, I would say, for example, have ID people. This would be a foreign key. And it would allow me to, within this table, simply create a table of IDs that says these people are doctors. The advantage there is that when I want to find a subset, I can add additional classifications that are specific only to doctors in this. For example, within this doctors table, let's add certifications. Now that has nothing to do with a patient. This allows me to distinguish the data between what attributes are specific to a doctor versus what attributes are specific to a patient. For example, a patient might have a condition, and we're able to add that. So by virtue of the fact of using foreign keys and linking to the people, we can now distinguish between the types of data that we track. But we're not distinguishing between the people by creating a doctors and storing people there and patients and storing people there. And once we expand beyond this, what we can do is we can create things called join tables. And join tables can join between those things, but at least in this scenario where we have these tables, we have people where a person can be anything, but we can associate those people as being doctors or as being patients or as being, whatever it is that we're trying to classify. It is also possible to not use multiple tables, and it is possible to use a table called classifications. You can see that data modeling can get so complex around this, but knowing about all of these strategies is really pretty good. So let's take a look at this, where we have a single table approach. So I just showed you a double table approach, and the one thing that you should remember in FileMaker when you're developing is I always ask myself the question, what is the cost? So the cost to me, what is the cost of adding a table for doctors and tracking doctor-specific information? And what is the cost for doing it for patients? And then what is the cost for doing it for whatever else I'm trying to track? Well, a table is extremely lightweight. It does not add a whole lot to your database. It does separate the data out, which makes a FileMaker system much more performant because it allows you to keep your tables really narrow. In the people table, I don't have a lot of extra fields identifying them, given that these probably wouldn't be there if we're using the scenario I'm talking about. But I get to control where the data is stored. And like I said earlier, data is like water. Going from a solution that you have existing into a new solution, you're going to have to flow that in. So under classifications, in this, we would just have the doctor classification, just like we had a patient classification, except in this situation, rather than having it directly in the people table where I have these two fields, I now have it in a separate field. And what this does is this allows you to multi-purpose your people table for solutions beyond just the fact that you're dealing with doctors and patients. But within here, these again would probably become numbers where they're Booleans. Remember, in all of computing, numbers are much easier to work with than, say, like our value list. Our value list that we had created all the way over here, that is not a very good way to track information because the word doctor is not what they call canonical. So, for example, if I was going to classify a person, and this is a good lesson as well. If I was going to classify this person, it is the exact same reason that we see in FileMaker's documentation that when you look at a particular function, and let's see if I'll bring up the data viewer. Why does FileMaker do this? Why, when we look at FileMaker, and FileMaker has a function that says get last message choice. Why does FileMaker return numbers of 0, 1, 2, 3? Because numbers are absolute, whereas strings of text, in order to represent something, are not absolute. So we look over here, and we look at our manage value lists, and our value list in this situation, doctor, that's the English word for doctor. Well, the Spanish word is completely different, and then the German word is completely different. So what we do is we create an enumeration. And we say, in my database system, the number 1 always means that that person has a classification of doctor. The number 2 has a classification for a patient. So when I'm storing the data, when I'm actually classifying it, however you choose to pick it, you're going to put that classification within here. And FileMaker has a really good way of doing this. Looking at our classification, if I was, let's say I was wanting to classify this right within this particular file. Within FileMaker, return delimited lists are really, that's just good to know too. Notice that this is the same field. This is the classification field, and this also is a classification field. And I'll just show you a little, just in case you're watching. And I know if you're advanced, you already know this, but remember this is a little sidebar here. Remember I showed you the radio button that we have right here, and the radio button makes it an either or. FileMaker is doing that, but it has nothing to do with the data. In other words, if I put the word doctor in this field, watch what's going to happen. All this is a widget. This is just a display widget. In FileMaker, checkboxes, radio buttons, all they do is display the data, how the data exists, but the storage of the data always is just a return delimited list. So, going back to that, how I would store the data, well, in this field, if I was going to classify Andre, it would be a 1 and a 2. And then the rest of my solution would be coded around the fact that when I look into this field, if the existence of a 1 is there, he's a doctor, because 1 means that he is a doctor. And when we go into our database, here's a great way to use your comment fields. Under my classification, many times what I'll use is this comment field, and I'll use it for my enumeration. I'll type in enumeration, and I will say 1 equals doctor, 2 equals patient. And that is how I store my data. And when you think about it from a data storage standpoint, storing a 1 versus the string, which these all come with a byte count. You have, I think, 2 bytes. What is it, 2 or 4 bytes? This is just way more to store than this is. So your solution stores numbers as much as you can, and that makes it really fast, but then your user interface conveys what those numbers mean. And so I've really exhausted this particular topic, but I hope it's given you a better understanding of how I approach data modeling and how truly there are so many ways that you can model data in so many different ways. So let's go over and take a look. Let's go in and get one of our questions here. Let's close the base elements. We'll close FileMaker Server and go to another one. All right, so we had Fernando, and that was all the way up there. Let's go to another question. Are there any places that I recommend learning JS? You know, there was no one place. I sort of started learning it early, but there are tons of resources. I'm sure other people have comments in the here in the chat. Otherwise, Udemy, I don't know. There's all kinds. If it's specific to FileMaker, then I suggest going with some FileMaker resources. I did a series, I don't know, like 2011 or something, long time ago. It's probably old, but the magazine website, I just did a series that walks you through everything that gets you started with JavaScript. So my own or anything that's out there. Problem with, yeah, so we got an answer there. All right. So Rolfang asks, my company has machines with assorted versions of FileMaker. How do you keep track of which features require which version? Do you dig through the help each time or just have it all memorized? I do not have it memorized. I have to go through the help, and if you are not familiar with where it is in the help, let's take a quick look at that. We go over to FileMaker, and we go up to FileMaker's help. This is always good to know because multiple versions, yes, it is unfortunate. In fact, I really sympathize with those of you that are consultants out there that have to go back to like FileMaker 15. Ooh, it's so painful when you have so much in FileMaker 18, 17, and higher. We go to FileMaker Advanced Help. That opens up a web browser and takes us right to the help. Of course, if you have not done this, I highly suggest it. There is a link when it brings that up. Download FileMaker Pro Advanced Help. Download this to your computer so that you can have it when the internet goes down or you're on a plane or what have you. Reference down here, I believe, is that where it is? Or it's, I forget where it is. Script steps, importing new features. Okay, this is how I access it normally. If you click on new features for whatever the version is, that will bring up a list of all the new features of the current version. I then scroll down to the bottom, and then we have this related topic down here, related FileMaker Pro advanced features not compatible with previous versions. And so this is my 3-step process. If somebody has a better one, put it into the chat. I'd love to know. But in order to find out what truly will break based on a version, this is where I go. And then we get this nice little list right here of the features not compatible. And we can see that the inspector came in FileMaker 13, slide controls, popovers, etc. And so having to remember, I imagine somebody's created a solution somewhere, but we can see that in 17, portals that display records. So this was our ability to not have to have extra table occurrences on FileMaker. A lot of things came out in 16, it looks like. 17, they're only listing 1, 18, and what have you. All right, so that's what I do. All right, so that was, let's see if there are a few more easy ones in the, here. And actually, I closed my window, which was, there it is. That was my YouTube right there. Stream. I was wondering where that was, so I could see the whether the stream was live or how many people we had on stream. All right, let's go to another question. We've got 89 people here. Hi, Matt. What is the best way to display a continuous on-screen clock? If you're talking about in FileMaker, which I presume you are, JavaScript is going to be the best. JavaScript will run its own process. So for me, I would simply create a new window. Using our new window script step, I would have a little viewer. So we'll create a new layout here. Just go blank, get rid of the footer, get rid of the header, throw on a little JavaScript. You're going to have some code in there. I imagine that will be coming and available with some new FileMaker feature. If not, you'll need to put it in yourself. I'll select the body here, set a height of 1. That'll automatically drop it to the smallest size. What do I have here? 156 is the width, and I'll just simply set in 156 as my width. Type that in, and so, and anchor this. Always, always, always anchor each one of these. And so go into browse mode, and so this little window right here would just be up in the corner if you needed the time, or if you need it directly in your UI, just put the web viewer right in your UI and have a little timer countdown type of thing. There's so much you can do with JavaScript, and the fact that we're getting a really true bidirectional is great, but you've been able to do a clock with JavaScript ever since the web viewer existed. All right, let's get another one. Hey, Matt, what software are you using to do this screencast? Hey, Tom, how's it going? I am using OBS. OBS, in fact, I'll bring it on screen and give you a preview. It's going to show a bunch all the way down because it's going to show recursive. There we go. OBS is what I use to record this, and you can see that I've got, here's my camera right here. I've got a screenshot, I've got a logo, although I'm not doing scriptology videos, and my main display. And I can see me, and you can see me, and I should have looked up at me, and I can see me. But yeah, OBS, and it'll stream right to YouTube. Here is, if you are interested, my audio setup. So I use a program right here that you can see called Audio Hijack. In order to get high quality audio, I've got my input device, which is my USB coming in. Then I have something called a gate. Then I am deverbing based on the bouncing of sound in this room, so I'm able to reduce the sound. And then I boost the volume because I have the gain on the microphone turned down really low so that it doesn't pick up my dogs and my kids playing video games and all the other things that are going on in my house. Good quality audio. Lots of little things to learn there. I could teach a whole course on how to do the video stuff. All right. So it looks like Greg answered it for him. Good morning from Japan. How's it going? Oh, we've got a lot more questions that came in, but let's scroll back up here. Is there an easy way to send notification to another user, like a popover, that there is in a new record when a new record has been created or need an action? All right, that's a good question, Mustafa. And let's see if I'm able to find the answer. There is, let's see if I can find it with a Google search here. It was Clickworks in Belgium, FileMaker notification. Let's see if this Google search will bring it up, but that's the keyword. Clickworks is the name of the company, and if you modify it with FileMaker and put up notification, and let's say put in script, let's see if it comes up. Use configure, that's a Claris, Troy, help FileMaker. I don't know if I'm, there we go. Always good to know. You get used to being exposed to so many of these little tricks and tips. So this was in 2014. It looks like it didn't hit the word notification on my search, but this particular article will give you the answer that you are looking for. It's a really nice thing that happens to deal with the fact that FileMaker has this event model. FileMaker is constantly polling for whether or not it should update this record. So as this record is sitting here, in the background, FileMaker is going, hey, you got anything new? You got anything new? Constantly talking back and forth with FileMaker. In fact, I've made a request that would, a long time ago, that I would love to have FileMaker do this, because you could make FileMaker way faster and infinitely more scalable. Is under the Layouts menu, under the Layout Setup, if we simply had a single checkbox that said cache results, or stop polling, or poll only every 5 minutes, or whatever, FileMaker would be able to scale a lot more. Because what's happening is, let's think about this. FileMaker is on this record, and this record, let's say it's a really terrible database that has 2,000 or 3,000 fields. All 3,000 of those fields, some other user, we've got user A and user B. User B goes and modifies the record. And I don't know if FileMaker does this. I'm sure somebody's worked with Wireshark. But if they go change one value in this record that this user happens to be looking at, out of all 3,000, I don't know if FileMaker's transferring all 3,000 again, but this is user A. And user A's FileMaker is polling and saying, is there anything new? Is there anything new? And FileMaker Server says, oh, yeah, some other user modified this record. Here you go. Here's all 3,000 fields and all the data. If FileMaker does that, it's just atrocious in terms of efficiency. If FileMaker had a diff, then it would be able to transfer just the one piece of information that needed to be updated and update. I haven't drilled down and used a tool called Wireshark to watch the TCP packets to see if that's what's done. I'm presuming that it does, which is one of the reasons we want to have narrow tables instead of wide. But that's how FileMaker works. And this particular article will tell you that there are these triggers, such as the on-record load trigger. Now, the on-record load trigger is actually really pretty interesting. In fact, let's take a look at this. The on-record load trigger, we're going to create a script in this solution, and we're going to call it on-record load. And let's do a dialog. Type that in, and then we'll say that we made it. So we made it here. All right, so we are now going to hook this up to the on-record load, and we want to, this is a great way to learn FileMaker. This is how I learn FileMaker. When new features come out, just play with them and see what happens, because you're able to find out that you can do things that you didn't know you could do before. So we go up to our layouts, we go to our layout setup, we go to our script triggers, we go to the on-record load, and we say that is the script that we want to run when the record loads. So, contrary to popular belief, which we just went into, we went from layout mode to browse mode, and it triggered the script. But contrary to the name of the script on when the record is loaded, what happens when we actually delete this record? Well, when we delete a record, FileMaker is going to load a new record. That makes sense. But let's delete all of the records and see what happens. Would FileMaker run that script? It did. But wait, there's 0 records. What record did FileMaker have to load? It didn't have any records to load. There was nothing to load. We deleted all the records. But even still, if you have a 0 found set and you delete the last record, even though there's nothing to load, the on-record load script still fires. So, by using little pieces of that type of knowledge, that's what we get, is we get solutions like this where I'm going to let you read the article, but it's basically how you can cause a script to trigger from one client, client A, over on client B's computer based on something that happens. Little tricks like that just make FileMaker really cool, but they're completely obscure and not known unless you come across them and watch a video like this. All right, let's go. I don't even know what time it is. I'm just sitting here chatting away, and we're just doing some FileMaker stuff. Let's go back over to Matt, having problems with the connection. Hopefully your connection gets better. My connection says it's excellent, heading out to YouTube. Let's switch over to the questions that I have. Let's clear up the screen a little bit, get rid of that solution, get rid of that solution, and we don't need ClickWorks anymore. Yeah, hopefully you got the URL, but you got what to search there for it. All right, let's go back over. We'll take the chat off for a bit and go back to a question and take a look at that. All right, so Tom T asked, I've implemented the full calendar into my solution, which full calendar, if you don't know, we'll go ahead and look at that. That's going to be like everybody's going to be putting that into FileMaker solutions. It's a free open source JavaScript calendar that allows you to have much more functionality than you can build natively into FileMaker. I've put it in multiple times into multiple solutions, and it will probably be available in some form through FileMaker coming up. Let's see. Please see the attached pic, which I happen to know what he was actually trying to solve. He was trying to solve the problem of aligning some CSS. So let's take a look at that. I happen to have that here. We'll go over to shared. There's full calendar. We'll open that up. So this is something that I showed on the magazine website. For those of you that are subscribers, we go into layout mode on this file. We can see quite clearly this is very much a non-modifiable file, probably because I copied it from my other account. Let me see if I can do this. And I'll do this really quickly. Bear with me. There we go. And I am going to say everyone can read and write. There we go. So if you ever come across this situation when a file is copied, this used to be the case. This is old school. If you copied a file off of a CD-ROM, at least on Windows, what happens is it comes with permissions. And in all of computing, almost everything boils down to it's a problem in the configuration file or a problem with permissions, and the way that you find out what the problem is you look for the log. Those three things, if you can remember that, that's all of computing right there in 3 words. A config file, permissions, are they right, and then where's the log file that's saying that there's a problem. So I was not able to edit this file, so that's because it belonged to my other user, Matt. I am logged onto an account which is not my Matt account, and I had to set so that everyone would be able to modify this so that FileMaker will be able to modify this. Which, going into layout mode now and selecting, I will be able to edit the file. So always something to learn. There we go. So this is just a web viewer, and this web viewer is loading all of this JavaScript. And the question was, I believe, he had an issue where he wanted to get this wasn't exactly aligned. And when we're going to be working with JavaScript, in order to align or move or position anything, it is, unfortunately, it will never be as comfortable as working in FileMaker's layout mode. I mean, it is really probably the biggest downside to JavaScript, HTML, and CSS is that you have infinitely more control in terms of what you can do, the events, and we think of them as triggers. But it comes as this big mess of having to know HTML, having to know CSS, and then having to know JavaScript. Where in FileMaker, we just learn FileMaker and then do what we want to do, but you can't do the same stuff. So in order to get information about this, you have to be able to use a debugger. And I don't have it installed, but I believe I have a tooltip turned on, and I will be able to do it right here in front of you, which is actually pretty good. Let me bring up a terminal because we're going to need that. In FileMaker, in order to be able to edit anything in CSS or be able to see what's going on in CSS or in the JavaScript or what have you in a web viewer, you have to turn on these developer tools. So I'm going to walk through this. I think the first place where I saw this was beeswax, but there's a couple of commands that we need to know about. I'm going to go into layout mode, and I'm going to pray that I need a text tool that I have in my, I don't want the license, I want, let's see, FM Web. Do I have that? Oh, I do. It's an expansion. It's a keyboard expansion. And it's right there. All right. So these are the commands that you need to know. In fact, I'm going to select all of those, copy them, put them right into the chat so that those of you that don't want to type don't have to. Hopefully it goes. Oh, it won't. YouTube won't take it. Bummer. All right, if anyone else has the commands, you can put them in. But you can see that it changed between FileMaker 14.15 and 16, and then it FileMaker 17 plus. This is the command that I have to have in order to turn on the debugging tool. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go into my terminal, which in FileMaker, in Macintosh, you're probably going to have this terminal. I use a separate terminal called iTerm, which has a lot more power, which allows me to interact with my Linux boxes in a much more comfortable fashion. On Windows, I'm going to have to defer to Soliant Consulting. Soliant Consulting, and somewhere on their website, I'm hoping Jeremiah Small has posted the way that you can debug code on IE. Now, IE 11 is integrated into FileMaker on Windows, and unfortunately, and I just looked at this the other day, Safari 9. We're talking about 2013. What is that? 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We have an 8-year-old web browser embedded into FileMaker. Please, FileMaker, let's update things. There's so many little things that are just blah, blah, blah. I'll get off of that. All right, so I'm going to paste that in, and I'm going to write that. Now, what that did is it simply wrote to the FileMaker preference file the ability to access a new command. Now, it's not going to be immediately available because I can see that right there. So I'm going to have to quit FileMaker and then restart FileMaker. Launch bar is the tool that I like to use, by the way, and we'll open up that full calendar. And if everything went as it should, I should be able to right-click and get the new option. So there is the new option right there, Inspect Element. This is what we have to have access to in order to be able to modify, or not modify, but be able to see anything. So with this button, if I wanted to get this, if I want to find out what are the settings that control this, number one, I can do this directly within this tool, but then number two, by doing it in the tool, I can then copy that, find out where the CSS is, and modify it. So I'm going to right-click this and choose the Inspect Element. And up is going to come, actually, it's attached here in the FileMaker window. So this is a good opportunity for me to try to remember how I break this out. Console, where is it? Is that it? I'm going to hover right there, download, dock. There we go. There's our two windows. I was trying to find this in my video, one of the videos I shot for the magazine the other day. We want to separate this. This is a web inspector. To inspect a web viewer or the WebKit implemented, I can dock it, or the best thing is to detach it right there. So by detaching that, it's fine. Once you detach it, then it remembers that it's detached, but I can now right click on this and inspect, and it'll bring up it again. So now I have both of these windows here. I am able to inspect anything about the CSS, but better than that, I am able to modify the CSS and see what the implications are of my modifications. So this Today button, which as we hover here, we can see that in the background, FileMaker is, the web viewer is highlighting everything. We can see, yes, this is indeed the button. First of all, what's causing it to look the way that it is? Well, it's CSS and it's a class. So we can see right here when I double click that these are the classes. So one of these things, it's either this one, or it is this one, or it is this one. Actually, all three of them are causing it to look and act the way that it does. So I'm able to see these, by clicking on this little sidebar area right here, and I can see which each one of them does. So I can have this on screen and correlate here. FC Today button, primary. You can see these are all of the settings. This is actually one of the ways that I learn about CSS that I don't know about. I will go to a web page that's a modern web page and then just look. Well, I know what margin left is. I'm familiar with cursor. I've never seen vertical align. What does that do? Well, then I go reference the CSS documentation or the spec and go learn about it. But notice these little checkboxes that are right here. So that Today button, if I want to change it, look at that. I just changed the color of the text by turning it off. I can turn off, whoa, there goes the background. It disappeared. Well, what happens if I was to add? Notice that when I click right here after this, what if I was to add a float to this? And I was going to float it right. Nothing happened. I was hoping something would. Let's see if a left works. There we go. Notice that I directly within this, I don't know where it went, I just modified the CSS directly in the editor. So this is a great way to play with the CSS to see what the CSS will do in terms of modifying your CSS. You can then copy the CSS that you put in here. So I would be able to copy these and put them into my FileMaker field or put them wherever they are. This is also where I find out, okay, FC button, maybe that's the CSS I want to control. Well, where is the CSS in this FileMaker solution? It could be within a script step, as we saw at the very beginning of this video. I showed a really cool trick. In this particular implementation, I happen to know that I am storing the CSS in a text box off to the side, and it's probably this one right here. In fact, if I look at the inspector, there it is. I've got it named style.css. So if I take this, let's copy all of it, and I went over to my text editor and I created a new window, and then I paste that in. I would be able to, with having looked at my that particular tag, I would now be able to do a find and replace. Here again is another tip that when you're copying and pasting a lot of things in FileMaker, it's really nice to have a tool that will remember your copy and pastes. So this tool that I bring up here, which I'm bringing up with a keyboard combination of Command and Spacebar, is a tool called LaunchBar. But I can start to type in clipboard, and one of the things that it does is it remembers my clipboard history. So I'm able to drill in and have this, it remembers, I think, 10 of whatever my last clips are. And I know that just before copying and pasting to get this into this text document, I had copy and pasted the actual value, the one that we saw over here when we were looking at our little inspector, which I'll just go ahead and get it again. So let's say I wanted this right here. I'm just going to copy this from here, go over to the CSS, do a find, where I find and replace, paste that in, and there we go. It takes me right to the CSS, and this is where I can now add the modification that I wanted to make. So if I had added that float, I would put that float right here, float left. I've now modified the CSS. I now copy all of this, go back into my FileMaker solution, and then paste it back in right here with my changes included. So you have to be willing to use this that particular tool. Let's resize this up to the smallest. Where is it? There we go. That is the primary way of dealing with anything with the JavaScript. Becoming familiar with this one tool is a big time saver in terms of learning how the CSS, what it shows. Computed is everything that the browser is doing for a style or for an object in HTML when it can't find it. Styles are the styles that are applied by the style sheets that are included. It is called cascading style sheets. So starting at the bottom and going up is the level of top down. It's just reversed. So we can see that we start with HTML and then the HTML body is applied. It tells you where it's actually coming from. So you can see this style is coming from this particular div, from this particular style. And eventually you get to a user agent style right there, which tells you, and then you get to the point where it says this right here. Now, if you're looking at this in like Safari or something else, this will tell you the file, the CSS file that was actually loaded. You can find that within the resources area and look at the full file. But in the case of a FileMaker web viewer, What happens is every web viewer that FileMaker creates is created temporarily in memory, or in many cases in temporary files in the temporary location. So this little file icon, file of 105, when I click on this, it'll take me to a file that FileMaker created as a temp file where I can actually get access to the CSS right here. And it's doing that within the debugger that's available here in the web inspector for editing things within web viewers. So there you go. There is that question. Hope that one helped a lot of people out in terms of being able to find that. Once you find the value that you want, such as making this wider or positioning it with more padding or margin, then you just do what you want to do and put it into the CSS, and the next time you load, it'll have what you want. So there we go. That's a good one. Let's go back over to our chat and see if we've got any questions that came in right there. All right, so we had a question that came in that said, what tools, software do you use for data modeling? You know, to be honest, Maku, I don't use any. I just model directly in FileMaker, and I've been doing it for so many years. I used to use an ER diagram, which the FileMaker relationship graph is not an ER diagram, but I've used OmniGraffle, and then I forget what the other one was a long time ago. Some other program that allowed you to just make boxes and drag connections between them. On a Mac, the one that I've used the most, if I have to model a more complex solution, doing an ER diagram first is really good, but remember that ER diagram does not directly translate to how you implement in FileMaker. How you implement in FileMaker is a little bit different. Is there an easy way to send notification to another user pop over? Oh, I covered that one, so that one was before. All right. Strong. Oosh. My thing just loaded a bunch of things right there. Respected, I'm a strong flyer in tutorials. Build, okay. How to create a value list from a table field without repeating contents. FileMaker doesn't repeat contents as far as I'm aware. David, you would have to give me a little more clarification. Hopefully that'll be down a little bit lower. How can we automate our import script outside of FileMaker to import data from ODBC driver without doing it manually? How to schedule a script in FileMaker scheduler? All right, I had a friend, and I'm going to take a quick water break here. I had a friend recently ask me about modifying or pre-processing a table of data before he brought it into FileMaker. Here is my best suggestion. Be willing to go outside of FileMaker. Really, if you want to make the most of FileMaker, you have to be willing to go outside of just knowing FileMaker. It is the best thing that you can do for your development career. If it starts with picking up JavaScript, then that's great. But the suggestion I was making to him was to use Python. You can put Python on FileMaker Server, Windows, or it's already available on a Macintosh server, and really there is no limitations. They use Python for so many different things in the scientific community, and it is so extremely fast. It's also a beautiful language because it doesn't have the semicolons. It's based on indenting, and it really is extremely powerful. And if there's something that you want to do, if it's like scraping a web page or if it's integrating AI, there's already libraries that have been developed. Just like in JavaScript, we already have libraries that do things like a calendar. And just the rest of it comes up to where can I find the library, and then how can I implement and use the library. And if you get over those two hurdles, and there's so many different primers for something like Python or JavaScript in Node that it's just worth it to go spend the time to do that. I know you're trying to solve your problems, but sometimes solving your problem comes at the cost of getting more education and learning. And so if I'm doing anything pre-processing wise, even if I'm working with an ODBC driver or whatever, I'm going to use an external technology to FileMaker, knowing that FileMaker cannot do things as quickly or as well as a language like Python. It just absolutely can't. If you have 10,000 records and you need to do something to all those 10,000 records, and your process is to import them into FileMaker, paying the consequence of auto imports and whatever else FileMaker has to do, that overhead is going to be much greater than if I ran it through Python, and I can get things back in milliseconds, or it'll take, seconds in Python that it may take minutes in FileMaker. FileMaker is great for its UI, for presentation, and for interaction of data, but it is not necessarily the best data manipulation modification tool if you have to do data manipulation. All right, is there a way to output a PDF in FileMaker Go other than email, for example, to save it on iCloud files? I believe there is, Raphael. FileMaker's PDF function that allows you to save a file should allow you to do that. Let's open up my solution file here, and we'll have to take off those script triggers really quickly. Layout setup, take off the script trigger. Don't want that. Go into this and our PDF. Remember, when we're in FileMaker, if we want to know whether something works or not, we're always interested in this menu right here of the compatibility. So if we want to know if it works on iOS, then we're going to put right there, I'll get rid of that step and just type in PDF, save records as PDF. Yep, it actually, the save as records as PDF will work on a mobile device. Now there are two folders that we're always interested in, whether we are doing anything on FileMaker Go or we are doing anything on FileMaker Server, such as the perform script on server. We are interested in the temporary folder and the documents folder. Those are the only two locations that are pretty much guaranteed on every device. The temporary folder, as I bring up a data viewer, and we are always interested in using these two functions right here. Get temporary path right there, which that's telling you my temporary path. There's the name of my hard drive. Then on Unix, Linux, this is the FileMaker specific temporary path. This is a safe place where we can store anything, anytime, whatever we want. It is an unlocked, universally writable location for writing things. That's where we want to write things unless we want to save them. If we want to save them, then we're going to read them back into the database. The other location is the get documents path. Now notice there are two functions that we have here, the get documents path and the document path listing. This particular function can come at a pretty high cost if you know that there's a lot of things in that file, because as FileMaker has to walk across and scan all of them, I've done this on accident where I have like hundreds, multiple hundreds of items in my documents path, and it just takes a long time. But if it's really small and lightweight, then this is a place where on FileMaker Go, in particular, the documents path is a great place to store things, because the databases, you can, for example, have a FileMaker database in a container field in the FileMaker database that you give to someone. So let's say you have a FileMaker solution, FileMaker Mobile. You send them a FileMaker file because they're not going to connect to FileMaker Server. This is for people who go offline and the mobile device becomes disconnected. That solution can itself go out to the web when it does have a connection, download a file into a FileMaker container field, and then export that file to the documents path, and that file is now accessible on FileMaker Go. It's accessible as an additional database by using a FileMaker database to transfer a FileMaker database, if that makes sense. But it's a really wonderful way for being able to get an update. Now, there are issues with regards to closing one file down and then replacing it and doing an import and so forth, but it is possible on FileMaker Go to have a local database that you can go out into the world with no connection, and then if you need an update, download an update, shut the database, transfer the data over, and have a new updated version of the file. But these are the functions that you're going to be using: the get temporary, the get documents path, and the get documents path listing. If you want to list, you can see all of these are the different documents that I have in there. I could, of course, use a filter on this to find whatever I want. I can take any one of these paths. If I wanted to determine that this specific value was available in here, I could very much determine that it is in my documents, and can do that on mobile as well. So those are the two folders that are really useful and valuable on both FileMaker Server and on mobile. All right, thank you. I'm just like talking about FileMaker. Question, how do you make, and I don't even know, I'm just going here. I dedicated until, yeah, it's 4:20, so I dedicated until 5 o'clock, 2 hours of talking about FileMaker. All right, how do you make the output of top call actionable? Ooh, this one's a little bit beyond the scope of what I could cover, but let's at least address what Chris is talking about. In order to debug and troubleshoot a FileMaker solution, so we're taking this up a step from, learning to develop a FileMaker solution, that's one thing. But then learning how to troubleshoot and debug FileMaker solutions, what you have to use is this thing called top call statistics. Now, it turns out that it used to be the case that FileMaker, and we'll open up my local server. I am, by the way, running a copy of FileMaker Server here on my local machine, and that's what allows me to develop really efficiently. If you're interested in that, I have an article over at FileMakerMagazine.com about how to run a local server. It's a great way to a developer who works in the environment that they would normally work on, that's really good to do locally, because if you have an AWS instance, you can't necessarily see what's going on with a perform script on server because it's not local to your machine, but you can if you install a local version. But we are looking at the top call statistics, and we would go into our configuration here, and let's see, where is that enabled logging? Right there. So here's our setting right here in the configuration logging, which I'm probably blocking right now down at the bottom there. But currently my top call statistics are disabled. If I enable this, then what's going to happen is FileMaker is going to start to track all of the things that are happening as a FileMaker solution is being used. Now, it used to display them in the user interface for FileMaker Server, but it does not do that anymore. We have to choose this option to download the actual log that was created. Then, with that log, we have to do something with it. Now, the server guru that I am most familiar with, his name is Wim de Kort, and I don't know if he is the guy who manages all of Soliant's clients, but I imagine they have a file. I haven't personally had a need myself, but there is a file out there that somebody can put in the chat, or you can search for it, or go see if Soliant has one that will analyze and look at the top call statistics. But there is also another tool that you can use that will directly connect to your FileMaker server, which is Zabbix. I have used Zabbix for Linux servers that I manage, but I have not set it up as of yet to work with FileMaker Server because I don't manage a whole lot of FileMaker servers. I just have a few that I manage for myself. But Zabbix, in conjunction with the top call log statistics, are how you go about and troubleshoot and find your pain points on a FileMaker solution that's either really slow or causing all kinds of different problems, because the top call will show you all of those things. So if you want to make things actionable, that is going to come down to parsing that log using a tool that maybe somebody like Soliant has. Otherwise, it's whatever you can dig out of the top call statistics. But there's a couple articles definitely on the Soliant website and other places where you can find out information. Video about how you produce, what equipment you use for YouTube. Cool, that was from a while ago. Thanks for your answer. Is it a way to commit a record of another user if I also want to change a field? This goes all the way back to when we were talking about earlier the doctor and patients thing. See, thanks for your answer. Is it a way to commit a record of another user if I also want to change a field on the same record? With regards to the commit, we'd have to, terminology, I'm thinking of a literal FileMaker commit. I'm probably a little abstracted at this point to not be able to answer this one, but send me an email on the reply of what you sent earlier, and I'll do my best to get to it. Is there is there a reference on how the on-click parameter functions for a C3 chart? An on-click, By the way, since I believe we have, we'll hide that. Actually, let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and just keep those down. Maybe I can load them. We will save all, close that, go back over to that full calendar really quickly. So there's multiple ways to trigger a script in a web viewer in order to in turn perform a FileMaker script. The most simple is on a button object, which I have simply right-clicked on this, brought up the inspector. The most simple way in all of JavaScript in order to fire a script is to have a class in here. I don't know if I can add one. I can't, but we'll take it over to our editor. Another cool thing about this editor is you can just copy straight from it. I just hit Command-C. I can go over and I don't need all of that. Just paste right here. I didn't take it. It should have copied it. Let's right click and choose copy HTML. Look at all those options. Isn't that awesome? You can copy the HTML, the attribute, the selector path, or the X path. This is useful. Just saying. Only if you're creating a tool like the one I am. Copy the HTML itself. Then we come over here and we paste it. So, on click is what this will look like, equals. So that right there. So in an HTML element that's in a web viewer, if there is an on-click attribute, you can then perform a JavaScript. So whatever the JavaScript function is, it will be called JavaScript function. And it'll probably look like that. You don't have to have those if there's no inbound parameters, but that's what it is in essence, adding that to that right there on click and then JavaScript function. I believe on click is right. Sometimes I get a few characters off or I'm thinking about something else and have to reference the documentation. But yes, there is a way to configure an on-click parameter for a C3 chart. So what you're going to do is this is just an attribute. So on that particular chart, I'll make a new line here. You're going to see, I forget what it is in, I don't know, I'm used to it in a library that I'm used to. So let's say, for example, you have a button object. You have what's called the DOM, and you have something that actually allows you to select it. So let's say in this case, I have a type of button on this, and I have this class right here, FC button. So the first thing in HTML is you have something that will actually select. Now, this isn't literal, what I'm doing right here. This is just pseudocode. I'm explaining what you do. So you select or find in all of your content what you're looking for. Classes are identified by a period. IDs are identified by a hash. So if I was looking in all of my objects, and it looks like this, it's probably document something. I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head what this is. This is why you always have to reference documentation. But out of your HTML document, you're going to select a particular class or ID, and then further to that, you're then going to do something which would be something like an add class. So when you add that class that you're going to add is simply an on-click class. So you can use JavaScript. This is one of the things that's so cool about JavaScript. In FileMaker, when a user is in browse mode, a user in browse mode can't click a button that says, I want you to add an attribute to this other button. Meaning, I want to click a FileMaker button that tells another button to perform this other script instead. You can't do that in FileMaker, but you can do that in JavaScript. You can say, in JavaScript, I want you to find this particular thing, and then I want you to add something to it that actually becomes an actionable item. That's power. That's absolutely awesome in terms of what you can do with JavaScript. So yes, the answer to your question, Al, is there is a way to configure an on-click parameter onto an object on a C3 chart and do it dynamically based on other things that the user does in the web viewer. So good question there. All right, can I give tips on the best way to set up write a script that creates a batch of new records and fills in some of the fields with names and info, but leaves blank other fields to be filled in later? This is a great question, Dave, because I think it allows me to address something for a lot of people when it comes to working with data in FileMaker. So we'll get rid of that particular item. We'll close that, go over to our FileMaker file. Let's just create a brand new file. We don't need that terminal window anymore. Let's create a new FileMaker file and create some sample data. All right, go to FileMaker. We will go to create a new one. And I'm going to call this one looping power, because the power is in loops in order to do things. All right, so the first thing I'm going to need in this situation is a bunch of records. Anytime that you are going to create fake data in FileMaker, there's multiple ways to do it. I'm going to show you the fastest way, the way that I like, and the way that a FileMaker developer would probably do. First off, I could create a loop to create exactly 5,000 records, but I'm lazy. I'm just going to hold down the Command N button and see how many I get. You can see that FileMaker froze there at 58 records, but in the background, FileMaker is creating records, because as soon as I take my hands off of the keyboard, we will see that I now have 192. All right, so the best way to create and manipulate fake data is this, in my opinion, my humble opinion. Remember, I said when I invited you to the live stream, this is FileMaker answers to some questions and opinions on others. I'm going to create a field called data, and I'm going to show you the easiest way to get data into FileMaker. We are going to go into browse mode, and I am going to switch to column view. Let's go list view, actually. List view is a little bit more fun sometimes, but we'll make our list view much smaller. All right. So I could take the time to write a loop. That would be in scripts. I would go over here and I would start a record loop. A record loop looks like this. You simply just have the loop step, which is going to add the end loop, and you are going to have a go to record, and you're going to go to some record. In this case, FileMaker defaults to the first one. I'm going to put that up at the top. By the way, without dragging that with the mouse, you can use the control key in order to move it with the arrows, which is what I'm doing right there. I'm going to duplicate that with Command D, and I'm going to move that down, and this is going to be a go to next. And then with this option of exit after last, this is your standard FileMaker looping pattern. So this would go to my record number 1, and then I could do whatever I want in this step right here. That is a way to deal with data, but as a FileMaker developer, there is one other more powerful function, at least if you're developing on the file locally on your machine and you're not worried about multi-user issues. That is this step right here, replace field contents. This one step is probably something that should be removed from the FileMaker menu by default, because if a user finds it, it's how they can completely screw their database. If you create custom menus, you should remove this, because a user can royally ruin all data if they have access to this one particular function. And it goes like this. I want record data on all of these. If I use that command, what was it? Command equals, what is it? Let's look at the function replace. Yeah, it's command equals. So in here, if I bring up command equals, I get this replace field dialog box, and this option right here, replace with calculated. This is how I do all of my data manipulation in order to create records. Now, how could I get multiple names? Well, there's databases out there, full data sets of fake data. If you just look for that keyword of fake data. In fact, you can even put in FileMaker fake data, and you could do a search for that, and Google will probably bring or find some FileMaker databases with fake data. But if you need to cycle across that data, this replace function, it gives you access to everything. The one thing you need to remember that you have access to on each and every record is its record number. Get record number. With that one function, you can do all kinds of different things. So for example, if I say get current date, I can get the current date. Now I can modify this by that get record number. If I want to have an incrementing date, just doing that is simply going to say whatever today's day is, and I'm just going to bump it by record number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's just going to be a sequential list of dates. Or if I want a completely random set of dates, we always have the random function. And this is what I love about computers and technology. So many of the games that we play or that our kids play, it is always based on random numbers, just random numbers generated. Now, random is generated between 0 and 1, but you can always modify that because it's a fractional value, unless it gets to 1 and it's a whole value, by multiplying it. So if we do random times and then we do 100. So that's simply going to take your decimal value if the number generated was 0.765 whatever. So that 100, remember we just count our zeros, is going to move that decimal right over to here. 2 decimal points. So it's going to become 65. So all you have to do then is simply just change that. You can use the round function is one of them. That will give you something, although I would need a value, so I'd round to 0 places. Or the more useful oftentimes are floor and ceiling. So if you use the floor function, that simply just takes a number in it. So our random right here, which is going to be between 0 and 1, and we're going to floor it, just means it's going to go to the bottom, or the ceiling, which is the opposite of that, would simply just go in the other direction. With this, what I'm able to do is I'm taking the current date and I'm able to, it's simply going to generate a random number. Now, that's always going to be a positive number. If you want to go back in the other direction, you can always, I don't know if this will work. Let's see if it will. Ah, it will. Do you see that? It might not work. I might have to put it on this number first. In other words, in order to do this, let's see if I can do this successfully. Use your random function, make that, and then make it a negative number, and you can plussing a positive number and plussing a negative number goes in either direction. So hopefully you get what I'm doing. Always copy your result from here, because if you want to run it again, I don't know what I got there, but you can see that I got a bunch of random dates for my data. 427, 125. I'm all in the year 2020. But you can do this to the year specifically or to the month specifically, build the date, whatever you want. But those are the core components of manipulating data. Now, if you want to leave a particular record empty, if you want to have blank ones, then all you're going to do is you're going to use this and simply limit your data set. So if I want to get rid of this, I'm going to equal that, replace that out. I've cleared out all of the data. What's nice to know about this, the whole little record indicator, is you can click in here, go to a specific record. Let's say I've got 192 and I want to go to record number 92 right there. I can now omit from this point, or I could have just all the way at the first record say I want to omit 1 through 92, and that's just going to be in our records where we go to the omit multiple option and say, FileMaker, I want to hide 92 of those. Those are now going to be blank, and then I would just run my data across that. Always remember that this is clickable right here as well. If you don't know this, this will flip your set. It will inverse it, so that I found the 92 that I omitted, now I found the 100 that I was left with when I had omitted the 92. So if you don't know about this little thing, absolutely worth it when you're dealing with data manipulation for development purposes. But that's how I manipulate data. Here also is a very good tip about the replace function. Let's say, for example, and I'm going to run that replace again that I had. I copied it to the clipboard. We'll get some dates on here. Replace. Yep. So that is a very scary thing to do when you are using the replace. Unless you double check and confirm, permanently replace the records on field data. Like always read this like multiple times unless you use the working field strategy. Now this is something that I do, where I will put in a database a field that nobody ever gets to use except for me as the developer. So let's go take a look at that. Cancel that, keep my data. I don't want to manipulate my data. I am going to go into my database and I am going to call this something like developer only. And we'll create that. What this does is it allows me to act on that field without act with that field data without actually modifying that field. So here, let's say, for example, this is off screen. I'm developing, and I'm like, I think I want to do something here, and I want to walk across this data and see what I get as a result. I am not going to do it on this field. I am instead going to bring my developer field, and I am going to reference that field. So if I want to see in this scenario what that replace is going to look like, I am simply going to say, I want to use the data, and now I want to modify it in order to see what my results are. And I'm going to then replace that. And I'm like, ooh, that didn't work the way that I thought it would work. Look at that. I got those numbers. But I have not manipulated my original data. A very, very important thing to know. Also, here's a really cool tip. I love giving these little things because those of you that hang around and stay and watch these, you get these cool tips. In FileMaker, you can use a replace on a global field across regular data and build up a stack of data. So, for example, if in this database, this particular field, clicking on my options, going to storage, and this was a global field, and we say OK, and say OK, I believe I am able to still do a replace on this. So, well, if I provided a result or provided a calc. So remember, you can do a replace on a global field, but that replace still walks across all the records in the found set. So let's see what happens. Let's set the developer only to a list of whatever's in the global field currently, which is nothing, and the data from a field. Now, FileMaker is going to walk across all of these records, but it's replacing into a global field. So what I would expect to happen, it's been a while since I've done this, is that this will simply create a return delimited list of all of this data. And the cool thing about this is a global field is local to the client. So it's a great way to build up a concatenated key if you're not using another scenario, which is to use a summary field using the list of summary function. This is basically a programmatic way of accomplishing the same thing. So let's see if it works. Replace. Whoa! That's pretty cool. Look at that. In a global field, I was able to walk across all records, not worried about messing up the data because I'm not replacing any local data into the database. I'm just using the replace function in order to get data into a global field. And this can drive the contents of a portal in order to show if these were all key values. A very cool technique where you don't have to set up an extra field using the list of summary. All right, so that's data replacement options. Let's see what else we have in here. See, that's going to jump and give me some more. All right. Do I still provide remote trainings? I am doing them sometimes, but for the most part, I'm just keeping up with the magazine and doing that stuff. When I change the icon in FileMaker Server files to view it in FileMaker host to end, it appears in my organization, but not from the outside. I'm going to have to skip that one, Mustafa. Don't know exactly what's going on right there. Do you embed the CSS into the HTML inside a web viewer? Ultimately, what gets into a web viewer, David, is all the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript has to get into the web viewer in order to actually, for the web viewer to do what it needs to do. But where it's initially stored and pulled from can be anywhere. It can be in a FileMaker field. It can be in a text block on the side in layout mode. It can be in a script step, such as the insert text. It can be in a custom function. So it's just, it has to be stored somewhere. But once it's stored there and pulled and then put into the web viewer, then the web viewer will render whatever it's supposed to do. Thank you. What's the best way to show data across multiple columns where the columns are date ranges? So like a classic accounting spreadsheet. What is the best way to show data across multiple columns where the columns are date ranges? Other than just putting them in a view that I don't know what we're talking about here, our table view, other than making these be the text format, I might need some more clarification on that particular question of what's going on. I do like to use, on fields, I like to use, especially if I'm doing this for my purposes for development, I like to use a font that will very clearly show me, let's see if I think I have Deja Vu in here. I don't. It's installed in my other account. Let's just go to Courier. Courier is a monospaced font, and what I like about monospaced fonts is they will show you the distinction between zeros and ones. So with that right there, when I'm looking at a date, remember your formatting for a date can always be controlled by FileMaker's display formatting, which is down here at the bottom, the data formatting. Actually, this was also a question I had in my other text file that I had somebody from Europe was saying, I'm using a Finnish version of FileMaker, but it's still not displaying my data correctly. It's showing in an English format. The data that is stored in FileMaker is completely separate from how it is displayed when a user is looking at it. The data, if I do not have any formatting on this field, then the data will present as FileMaker determines that it should be. Let's switch this quickly, this data field, over to a date field. We'll change that, say okay, we know that you're doing it, and be fine with it. So here you can see that the data formatting has become active, and I now have the date option, and it's saying as entered. If you are in another country, you're using an English version, or you're using a foreign version and you're getting the English version, here is what FileMaker added, the long system and short system. Unless you specifically format to one of the pre-formatted options or choose the custom option, if you want it to just simply display the way that your system does, choose the system short or the long. And that's going to be the best way to have your data display. So in this case, my system short date is going to display the way that I want it to see. But as a developer, I don't like that. So I like to be able to, I don't like to see this jagged edge. So I like to go in and specify when it's a developer date, I like to specify that I'm going to see, what is it, let's go with, I think, year, and then let's go with the year on this one. 14, we'll turn that one none, and then we'll say that's none. Yeah, we'll go ahead and go none for that. But we will set these to 0 buffered. So this is basically going to be, and I should have done it like this if I want it reversed. Year, month, and then day. Let's go like that. So however you want to see it, picking a monospaced font and then making this look how you want it to be, you can see when I click in there, this is how FileMaker has the data stored. In fact, if I change this to a period, FileMaker will continue to store this as a period. If I click in this one, it's got the slashes, but if I click in this one, it's got the period. FileMaker doesn't muck with your data, but you can force it to display the data how you want. Now, if you want the data to be stored in a particular format, then the only way that you're able to do that is as an auto enter and with a calculated value. This is where you're able to forcibly put a date or a time or whatever into whatever format you want. But FileMaker has to support it. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know that FileMaker will take a month. So if I go 22.3.2020, I don't think FileMaker will take that internally. And I did show this on another video, but for those of you that never saw that video, FileMaker does have a internal undocumented method of doing this in reverse date, but you have to use the plus signs, oddball. So what is it? It's 04, and today is the 30th. So FileMaker will accept that as a date. You can see right there, it's formatting it to 20/04/30, and that is the oddball date that FileMaker will store. A little bit useful, but depends on what you're doing in FileMaker. All right, full calendar is available at Full Calendar IO. Lucid Chart, yeah, I've used Lucid Chart, so good on that. Thanks for effort. Thank you, guys. I appreciate those of you that are sticking around. Wow, we still have 71 people. At the max, we had 98, but they can always watch the replay if they want. All right, we're coming up here on the 2 hours of questions. I'll skim through here and see if I've got any more. I don't know. It looks like that's almost at the bottom right there. How can I host my project? It's always too much slow while online, but good on a local network. All right, WAN solutions, Rana, hope I'm saying that right. WAN solutions and FileMaker, if you were watching earlier in this live stream, I mentioned how FileMaker is constantly doing this polling, this back and forth. Do you have updated data? Do you have updated data? What do you have that's new? And then bringing it down. And this whole concept of narrow tables versus wide tables, because FileMaker transfers the whole record, the structure of a FileMaker solution is more important than it is for, say, a SQL solution. In general, the solution itself matters because you want whatever is going to perform the best. But if the FileMaker solution has a number of things that are not necessarily good about it, then it's going to be slow. It's just the nature of FileMaker. So what are the things that you can check? Well, there's a really good tool out there that I like that has like a report card that it does its own best interpretation of why or how your solution would be slow. Is FM Perception from Geist. It basically, you use the developer tools. You save this right here, a database design report, and that will then be something that you can import into FM Perception, and it will run this report card. And FM Perception has all kinds of features and functionality. But let's say you aren't going to pay for FM Perception and you just want to find out, how can I make a quick assessment of a FileMaker solution? Here's a quick and easy tip. When you go into the managed database, the first thing that I'm going to look at is on a graph. I'm going to look at how complex the graph is. In fact, this gives me a good opportunity to bring up that picture when I was describing earlier. Looking at this graph, by the way, Andre, don't take this as bad news, good news, because I don't know what types of connections these are. But when I go into a graph and I see this many connections, I know, and I'm thinking, FileMaker has to evaluate on startup every one of these things. Not only does it have to evaluate every one of these things, but on the layout that is the display layout, if that was, say, for example, this gray box, FileMaker has to load all of these fields and all of their data, has to evaluate through all of the relationships and determine from each one of these what it has to evaluate in order to load. That's the first step. In fact, Clay has done a really good job over multiple DevCons of explaining the process of events. And I would highly suggest going to YouTube and finding those videos and take the hour or hour and a half that it takes to watch them, and watch them if you really want to know and understand how to make a really well-performing FileMaker database. But this is first step. Look at the relationship graph. If it's complex and has a lot of connections from the perspective that you are starting on, so if your layout is, let's say, based on this table occurrence right here, I know it's doing a lot of looking into a lot of things. Now, I don't know the quality or the types of the connections, but I do know that it's doing a lot. Next step. Step number 2 is once I go into the table, I look at the table itself, looking at how many fields does it have. If it has a lot of fields, that is a wide table. That's a lot of information that's being transferred. Step number 3, you're going to go into the table itself, whichever has a lot of tables. You're going to sort by type. Type is then going to put at the bottom, which I don't have anything in here. Let me create a calc field really quickly. FileMaker calculation, please, sir. There we go. And we'll just call it yay. And we'll say OK. All right, so by sorting by type, FileMaker is going to put the calculations down at the bottom. So I can look, and if there was calculations, if FileMaker, if you have more calculations than you have data fields, then you are telling FileMaker, hey, FileMaker, I'm lazy. I want you to do more of the work than I was going to take on the work and figure out solutions of better ways to store the data. Maybe a particular field doesn't need to be calculated and unstored. Maybe it should be a regular text field and should use an auto enter value, because it really only gets changed when the user interacts with the user interface. So the number of calculated fields, and then the second to that, the fourth step is, after you've counted the total number of calculation fields, how many of them are unstored? And if you have a large number of unstored calculated fields, and if those fields are on the layout, So if I have a field that is that calculation and that calculation is unstored and you're doing this across the network, I guarantee you, you will have a slow FileMaker solution. And the solution to these problems are to narrow down the number of unstored calculations and start to ask yourself the question, is there another way that I can store and get this data in? Most of the time it's an auto enter just regular text or number or date field. And two, is this operation something that has to be in this table? In other words, in our design of our database, the way that we create how things look, we don't have to have everything on the layout all at one time. In other words, there's a lot of FileMaker developers that they will create a FileMaker solution and they're just throwing everything into a few tables rather than thinking and segmenting things out and saying, you know what, all this information that we show on tab 3, really the only people that see that are administrators. And so what we need to do is let's go try to get some of these fields out, and let's take a percentage of these fields out that deal with this particular area or functionality of my database and get it into its own table or into its own structure. And by that, what you're able to do is you're able to create what I call solutions within your solution. So in FileMaker, let's pretend right here that I have a solution. I'm going to make some random connections here. So here, this represents my FileMaker solution. You do not have to have the whole of your FileMaker solution be comprised by this collection of table occurrences. You can have what I call a solution within a solution. So I would duplicate this, which I'm doing with the Option key, and I would say, you know what? All of these data connections that FileMaker is loading, well, this particular functionality, this is administrators. I really don't need this. I'm going to remove this out of my main solution, and I'm going to give those users their own solution that they can see within this. And then in the UI, that simply becomes a button that looks like this, where it says, you know, view admin stuff. Right here in this scenario that I'm telling you about. So a user is going through the solution, let's say 90% of the users are using all the stuff on tab 1, tab 2, but we've taken out parts of the solution. We get to tab 3, oh, you're an admin. Clicking this button just simply moves you from this context over to this context. And what you're doing is you're dividing your solution out so that instead of loading everything across the network, you're thinking from a user by user perspective and thinking, okay, when this user gets over to this table occurrence, it's really only loading however much data from these other table occurrences. It's really zippy and lightweight. And so that's the best I can offer. There's other optimization tips that you can do. One of them in particular I will give you is under the file and the file options, under your switch to layout right here. This option for the file, if I want to create a very fast booting FileMaker solution, then what you have to be aware is that whatever layout the user starts on, whatever table it is tied to, it is loading all of those things. The quickest solution right here, I will create a table called startup. That will be an empty table that I will intentionally keep empty. In my relationship graph, I will have a table occurrence called startup. In my solution, and let's go to the fields for startup, let's get rid of everything, delete it. It is just a complete and utterly blank table called startup. And over in my solution, I'll create a new layout and I will call it startup. In fact, I've done videos about this, and this particular layout, when I go to the layouts and I go to my layout setup, it will be based on startup. And in that area of the file options, under the file menu, guess where I switch to the layout as my default? Startup. What is FileMaker doing? FileMaker is opening its file, and it's opening its file to go to a table of nothing on a layout of nothing. And then at that point, you decide where do you want to take the user. Is this a user that is in the customer service department? If it is, then let's just go over to that layout, and then that layout will load the records that it needs to load for that user to work. Is this person an administrative person? Well, then we'll go to the administrative part and we'll load that. And all of that can be determined based on the privilege set or the username or whatever you want to do. And by the way, it's all triggered based on a script. If you're unfamiliar, in File Options, under Script Triggers, you're going to have this one right here connected to a script on first window open. So whatever script is connected right here, which we can click plus, and we can call it our startup script, whatever is in this script can determine whatever you want to do. If get privilege set, so if get current privilege set name equals customer support rep, whatever you've named your thing. Well, we're going to go to this layout, whatever the layout is. Otherwise, you're going to do whatever else. So I think you get the idea. Those are the optimizations that you can do with regards to your wide area network and FileMaker and how you approach your solution. All right, so I'm about to wrap up here, and I'm sure I can do, yeah, it's 5 o'clock my time. Not too many other questions that came in, so I'll see if I can just answer them quickly without going into a long explanation. Did you know the name Python was chosen to honor Monty Python? I did not, but that's pretty cool. There's so many languages, like the friend and I were talking about awk and sed are two different command line tools for stream editors for text processing on Linux. And it's made of the initials of the initial authors, their last names, I think. Cool stuff. Is there any chance to get the CD-ROM from FM? Wow, really old. Yes, I do have that. But in order to open it, I think it requires Stuffit Expander. And I don't know if there's a tool that expands Stuffit Expander files. And then you have to convert from the .fmp3 format to the FMP7 so that you can then convert to the FMP12 format. It will be extremely hard, but if you want to send me an email to editor@filemakermagazine.com, I can get you a link to that. So how can exporting a found set of temp table allow workspace? So how can exporting a found set to a temp table allow workspace to be interact with massaging of a temp table? Workspace, I don't think you're referring to the scripting workspace, but is it possible to export a found set to a FileMaker file, manipulate it, and then bring it back in? If that's the question, yes is the answer. You can do that. Whatever your found set is in FileMaker, so if I've just created 21 records, if I went to record number 11 and I omit everything from this record on, which here's a quick tip, by the way, if you want to if you're at record 11 and you don't know how many records there are, I could do the math simply, 21 minus 11. But if this said, 15,000, just put in an astronomically large number like 999999999. FileMaker will come back and it will tell you that you can actually put this. Well, I can't put that. Let's put 999. There we go. See what FileMaker came back and told me? It came back and told me there's only 11 left. So just put a high number and FileMaker will do it for you. And then get rid of those. I would export this. It would export only the 10 records. And when I export, which I can export with the export records step, I can export as a FileMaker Pro file. Now what you can do is you can make a connection to a known file that is connected to this file in order to have access or do whatever. I know that's a little bit abstract in terms of what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is if I went to the manage external data sources, if I created an external data source to a FileMaker file, I have done this in the past, although there is a security issue that you have to bypass with this. It is possible to export from FileMaker as a FileMaker and then be able to manipulate it somewhat remotely. Otherwise, you're going to do whatever other manipulation you want. But most manipulation that I do it with Python or other languages. I don't do it. I need more specifics on that problem. What's your favorite way to show a progress of a script? Do you use a particular progress bar or widget? Ooh, Sol, this is a good one because I've used all kinds of different progress methods. Let me give you an idea of some of them. One of them uses a container field. So we'll go to our field right here, and we'll just create a container field, and we'll create that. So the way that you would use a container field, this is my startup, so I need to go to that, and there's my container right there. So a progress bar. If you want a FileMaker native method in order to show progress, one of the ways that does this is as a view by form. So this container right here could contain a sequence of progress bar images. So you're always working from 0 to 100%. And so what you do is if you were using 1 pixel line strip that accounted for this width, you could do that, and you would just have to have all of the incrementing percentages of that bar. So in your bar storage, so let's say you would have a field called progress bar. It too is going to be a container type, and that container type, once we say OK, actually cancel, I wanted to create that. When you go to your options under your storage, I would have a maximum repetition of 100. So in the progress bar, which by the way could be a global or it could be a table stored separately, a settings or configuration file, but in each one of these 100 repetitions, you would have each sequential process of what would build a bar, and you would simply just use a loop, a FileMaker loop, and just replace the image in, and it simulates a bar. Also, I have used for progress bars, you can simply use a merge field. This is actually the most simple way to do this in FileMaker, is you can have something like that. So what do you use as text within this? Well, within the text of a progress bar, you can have a character. I don't have the character viewer up. Let's see, I'd have to bring it up. Good thing to know about. Let's see, keyboard, input sources, show an input. There it is right there. All right, so we go here. Oh, where did it put the little thing? I forget where it is. There is a way on the Mac to get the little widget in here, the emoji or something, that allows you to look at all of the different characters. But essentially what we're looking for is there we go. There it is. In the first of the keyboard on the Mac, show keyboard and emoji and menu bar. So this is what I want right here, show emoji symbols. So when we bring that up, there's going to be this little tool that allows you to see, I don't know where it went. I don't want the keyboard viewer, Matt. I want the emoji. Oh, this is what I hate about it. It hides down here, and if you get it off screen sometimes, oh, I brought it up for the Finder, so it's not going to show for FileMaker. All right, get rid of it for the Finder, now show it for FileMaker. That's one thing I don't like. But in here we have, where is it? It's always good to know about all these different symbols that you have access to. But in here, there's also bars, and then, where is it? Okay. In this character viewer, if you go here and you customize the list, notice that there's a little checkbox where you can add all of the different things that you can see. I like to just go to the bottom and I just go to code tables, and then I say show Unicode right there. So that then shows, and so I can now just look at this whole Unicode table and see the plethora of characters that I have access to in FileMaker. And you can scroll down here, and it's got this little thing right here where you can scroll down past the languages and get into the really high-end letter-like symbols, number forms, arrows. Look at all those arrows that you can have access to. But what we are looking for, control characters, where are they? There they are, block elements. You see those characters right there? You can do anything you want with those characters. So like this little slice right here, what's really nice is if you know you're working with a progress bar and you want to do something for 100% of something, guess what you're going to show right there within that global variable? You're just going to sequentially show 100 of those black bars. And of course, with conditional formatting, you can make this green, red, yellow, whatever color you want, and just put it in as part of your loop. And then a third option that I will give you that I have used in the past is, of course, a web viewer. And a web viewer is going to give you access to JavaScript and doing whatever you want. And that's the third that I've used. This is the simplest and what I would go for. This one you have much more visual control. But if you need just a simple one, just go for text and block characters. It's a great way to do progress. All right. So this I know is a follow-on. Hi, Matt. Do you get an example of the XML clipboard? It is a base elements function, which I showed at the very beginning. And if I develop in English, when you open Spanish, it will not change. No, I don't believe it does. I think in FileMaker, it stores in the English format, but you can display in the European format. Thanks, David. The Godfather is actually feeling a little tired now, going for 2 hours. But thank you for those of you that have hung in. And there's 56 of you that stayed till the end, or people have come in and out. I think I'm going to call this one a wrap. I can do this at another time. It's nice to just be able to just talk about the solutions to things and not go too deep into the weeds. I know I do spend a lot of time on some things. I didn't get to all of the questions that I have here, but that just leaves me with feeder content for the next time. I've got a couple of them here. But I think at this point in time, yeah, good collection of questions. I'll mark off the ones that I have, and we'll get to these at another time when we do another video. I'm going to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. I'm going to go take a drink and let my throat rest. And I will see you guys for another video at another time. Always feel free to send in your questions. You can send them to editor@FileMaker Magazine, even if you're not a subscriber, although I will probably prioritize subscribers. But if your question, if you phrase it in a way of, it's always best to start with, I'm trying to do this, and explain the scenario to yourself rather than trying to explain the problem that you're having. In other words, here's an example. Instead of saying, the web viewer won't show my HTML because the CSS is broken, that's like really, really general, as opposed to saying, I'm trying to use a web viewer in order to show 50 images because the user wants to be able to drag those images in the order in which they want them to be displayed in FileMaker for output. That is much easier for me to address rather than saying part of the problem, which is you were working on the web viewer and you couldn't get the images to show, and you think, how do you get in JavaScript images to be in order? Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly what you're trying to do. So if you explain the problem, and then even best, if you have your FileMaker file and take out all of the data, maybe you save a clone or something of it, the people who have provided me with a file of what they're trying to solve allows me to go right into that file, work up something and try to solve it. And if I have the time with all of my other work, and it makes for a great article, then I create it into an article. Otherwise, we wait until times like this where I have a break and I can do a video like this. So, all right, guys, everybody, thank you for tuning in and for your comments and your feedback. And as always, wishing you much luck with your own FileMaker development. And until I see you next time, see you later.